Okay, so we left off with the Lusitania and unrestricted submarine warfare. Essentially, the Germans had decided to continue this unrestricted German submarine warfare around the island of Great Britain. They had declared it effectively a war zone. And the Lusitania was a passenger ship. It was, and you can, again, Wikipedia away on the Lusitania to get the specifics, but it was a very quick ship that would go typically to the United States, obviously. But the problem was that it was a passenger cruise ship that was taking immigrants to other places, but it had a little bit of a twist. It was passenger ship, it was a cruise liner, but it was also transporting munitions and supplies back and forth from other places. And the thing that's going to get the Germans into trouble is that when they sink the Lusitania, and they still to this day hold, that was a naval vessel. If it's carrying ammunitions and supplies and things that are going to help blow us up and help against the war, it's fair game, was their outlook on that one. But again, it did have passengers, including 120 United States citizens. And there were warnings issued right next to the booth where you bought the tickets for the Lusitania that this was a war zone. You should not be using the Lusitania to go back and forth, and other ships as well. But specifically, there were warnings about this. The people still got on the ship of all nationalities, and the 120 United States citizens that died basically sent up outrage across the United States that, yeah, that we're probably going to need to get into the war. The United States had previously dealt with the Zimmerman Note. Again, we're going to talk about that in actual class and take a look at what that says. And basically this was the straw that broke the camel's back. So typically, when you're asked what two things get the United States into the war, it's the sinking of the Lusitania and the Zimmerman Note. Okay. So, to take us back to total war, which is the theme of our 15 minutes here, all aspects of society are mobilized by the government, creating a total war. So, everything, every part of daily life, whether it's economic, political, social, are going to be changed, mobilized, and we're going to see a huge increase in government control over what's going on. Censorship, if you can see, that's the very first word under the political group there. Censorship is going to be a main aspect of total war. But essentially, we see an increase in government power during wartime, primarily because of this. Economically, they control the resources, so food rationing is going to go on. You cannot strike against things, against the making of things. Price controls are going to be in effect. Censorship and propaganda, lots and lots of propaganda on all sides, all countries. We're going to take a look at some of those posters next, and we'll take a look at them in class. In your notes, as you're filling in your blanks, I ask that you go through and try to identify the resource or what the point of the propaganda poster is. A lot of them are going to be resource based, but some of them are also ideological. So as you go through these 6 different posters, try to make those notes on your fill in the blanks. Socially, women are going to be employed in the factories. So again, at the beginning of the 1900s, we see militant. Let me see if this is the. Oh, that's the posters. We see militant suffrage and women's movement activists like Emmeline Pankhurst, and they're setting things on fire. They are smashing stained glass windows in churches, being extremely vocal. And like we said, the militant phase of the women's suffrage movement is at the beginning of the 1900s. And with the First World War, they mobilize, and after the First World War, Great Britain is going to grant the right to vote to women. Also, in Germany, with the Weimar Republic, they're also going to grant women the right to vote after World War I. So I do want you to take a look at the 6 posters and see if you can check out and locate the individual resources. Some of them are extremely obvious. That does say the Hun and the home. A lot of folks make the mistake of thinking that the Huns were Mongols or up in that territory. They're actually over in eastern Germany and Prussian area, and they stretched out so far that they interact. The Mongols stretch out so far that they interact with the Huns, and they have some common ancestry with Genghis Khan. But I think that's in that Mulan movie, something about the Huns being Mongols. It gets very, some people get a little confused about that. But if you actually were to go out to and Google Wikipedia the Huns, it would tell you otherwise. Again, take a look at what's going on with these posters. War savings certificates. If you have a savings bond, that's essentially what this is. You buy a savings bond for $25 and uh, the worth of the savings bond will actually be 50 in a predetermined amount of years, which is anywhere from 10, 15, 20, 25 years. It accrues interest. It's a very slow interest accruing system, but effectively you're buying into the government to give them money now so that they can fight the war, and then you get your payment back with interest later. See here again. Take a look. I don't want to spoil too much of the resources idea of these posters, but they do cover all aspects of kind of the war at home. So as we move on to the end of the war, Prince Max von Baden is really who's going to contract President Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson's the United States president at this time, to sue for peace. Okay, and that's what you call it when you call up the other nation and say, "Hey, we're about ready to give up." You're suing for peace. The armistice is going to be signed on November 11th, 1918, which is why we usually get November 11th off at the beginning of the school year and the random holiday in the day in the middle of the week sometimes. November 11th, because again, 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month is when the treaty is signed. The Treaty of Versailles is technically going to be signed, however, in 1919. Economic cost was substantial. Human cost also substantial. And it does make a point of saying that France is going to be the most have the most number of soldiers killed proportionately. Maybe not the most in numerical value, but definitely proportionally to the other countries. And I want you to keep that in mind for something we're going to do later. There are going to be three voices of the peace conference, and it's important that you know all three of these and what they wanted to accomplish. You've got Woodrow Wilson from the United States. He was the voice of moderation. He wanted a less punitive, it looks like punish for a reason, a less punitive agreement. And we're going to take a look at his 14 points in class. The French Premier Georges Clemenceau, again, maybe butchering because, it's French, he was out for German blood. He wanted to punish the Germans, which, again, if you remember from the previous slide, the French lost the most amount of people. And then the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George. He was less punitive than France, but don't get it wrong, he still wanted to punish. He still wanted to punish those Germans. Now, we briefly talk about the Wilson's 14 points. These are the three that were usually the most that you need to pay the most attention to, but please refer back to your crash course on the different points and the discussion in class when we talk about the 14 points, because those play a major role. But essentially, it was the whole idea again of that self-determination of nations and human rights. He didn't want to punish. He didn't want to punish Germany as much as everybody else did. But the big thing that usually gets the question, the one that usually needs to be remembered and that you need to take from this, is that Wilson's 14 points is going to establish something called the League of Nations, which is the precursor to the United Nations today. And unfortunately, what it's also going to do is ask other countries to step in case there is another outbreak of war or a threat of war, or other countries to kind of help police other countries. And the United States is not going to want to get into this. Wilson, again, the 14 points calls for the Council of Nations to preserve peace and establish humanitarian goals. Essentially, again, what sort of the United Nations does today. Uh, and a lot of folks are going to join, but the United States is not. And I want you to think and just jot down some ideas on your fill in the blank notes of why the United States might not have wanted to join the League of Nations, even though it was a huge embarrassment, especially for Woodrow Wilson, since it's his idea and he can't even get his Congress to ratify. Here's the big saying for this unit. We've had the who pays the taxes and all sorts of that. Well, in this unit, it's the Treaty of Versailles wants to make the Germans cry. It rhymes. You can remember it. Treaty of Versailles, make the Germans cry. Again, they wanted that punitive agreement against Germany, and boy, are they going to get it. They're going to assign huge war reparations, which looks like repayment for a reason. 132 billion. We've had the discussion in past years about whether or not that's today's money, then money. I still don't have a good answer for you, so you're welcome to check that out if you'd like. But essentially, they're going to owe more back to all the countries that they invaded and attacked than they can possibly pay back. They're going to lose territory, and again, it's important for you to understand what territory's lost, because Hitler, that's going to be his first thing he's going to go back after. So it shouldn't be a shock to you that the Alsace-Lorraine is going to be given back to France, and the Rhine, territory of the Rhine, is going to be demilitarized and given back to the French. So Germany's going to lose these two territories. As a side note, there was land taken from the Russian Empire. We'll have to talk about why that was here in just a moment. Their military is going to be downsized, and when I say they, I mean Germany. German military cannot go above 100,000 people according to the Treaty of Versailles. They can't have an air force, and they are only allowed a very small navy, because the idea wasn't only to make them cry, but to keep these things from happening in the future, which again is a common theme of all these treaties, and I don't think it's worked yet, but okay. Other measures: Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and Romania are going to be formed. So the Serbs are just having a grand old time. They finally realized their dream. But also notice we now have Czechoslovakia on the map. Poland and Hungary are going to gain their independence. Now, if you remember, who had Poland? If you said Russia, you're right. Part of that land is taken away from Russia. Hungary is going to be split from Austria, and it is now an independent nation. Also, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Finland are formed from the Russian Empire. So those lands are also taken away. So part of Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland formed from the Russian territories. So they're going to gain their independence. And again, super duper important that you understand that these nations, where they originally came from. With Poland, we're going to see, and Hungary, well, no, strike that. With Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, not so much Finland, but Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, whenever Russia becomes the USSR, it annexes and sucks all those lands back up into Mother Russia, if you will. And again, all of these nations, with the exception of Czechoslovakia, are going to eventually become dictatorships. We will be talking in class about how the treatment of Germany compares to the treatment of France at the Congress of Vienna, and why is Russia losing territory. We will be talking about that in class. So now would be a good time to pause and just make sure you jot those notes or those ideas down of the difference between how everybody treated France in the Congress of Vienna, which did include Germany, although it was Prussia at the time, versus how they treat Germany after World War I.